He probably wasn't the first to say this, but John Green taught me the lesson that World War I was not the war to end all wars. It was the war to change all wars. And I think that storytelling still needs to catch up with that fact. In America, World War I is the forgotten war for many reasons. It was unpopular, it divided the country, it changed the lives and culture of our largest minority, German Americans, and it was fought across the world for reasons we didn't really understand. Not many stories or films focus on it due to its unpopularity, and it's often overshadowed by its more popular sequel, World War II, which is probably even more complex, but it can easily be simplified into blockbuster storytelling. This is a good guy. These are bad guys, obviously. The good guy will win and save the day. Hooray! That's a wrap. The end of World War I saw a huge wave of expatriates, people who just gave up and couldn't live in America anymore after the conflict. They were known as the Lost Generation because of this, but I also think that they were called that moniker because we, their descendants, lost them in our memory as well. These men went off to war, something seen as dangerous in Western culture, but traditionally, it was important. It was where you became a man, where you became a hero. These men got there and saw something so unimaginably different from what their grandfathers saw. War has always been a horror, but until the Great War, there was a sort of romance tied to it. It was the place where if you were brave enough, strong enough, fast enough, smart enough, or just kept going and charged on, you could make it. Where heroes were forged in fire, where families lived up to their names with skill, where leaders dove headfirst into battle, where you stood in the middle of the battlefield and faced your enemy and dueled him. But all that changed in World War I. The machine gun didn't care how heroic you were, and anyone could pick it up and fire it. Charging first was nearly always a death sentence, and so many people died from artillery or gas or snipers, never actually seeing the enemy. The romantic setting of war filled with heroic tales that the world knew, shattered in those muddy trenches of France and Belgium. However, World War I has seen a resurgence in popular culture, with the game Battlefield 1 amongst other things. Nowadays, so many people want to remember the stories of those who fought on the early frontiers of modern warfare, but I just hope that we do it in the right way. Thankfully, I think 1917 does it perfectly. If we really want war to end, our culture's romantic view of warfare needs to fade. Some modern movies try to do this, weaving in dark, grey, bitter, and nightmarish scenes to show the horrors of war, depicting in more detail the brutal setting of these heroic tales of bravery and sacrifice. But these movies still have the same plot armor, the same crazy missions, the same young hero fighting to become a man. I'm not saying that there is no heroism on the battlefields of modern warfare, but I more appreciate more individual and more real stories concerning this period. 1917 is not about a young hero learning to become a man. 1917 is not about a leader taking a dozen bullets and still charging into the fray. 1917 is not about a group of ragtag heroes fighting for a MacGuffin to turn the tide of the whole war. 1917 is about two soldiers tasked with delivering a message through no man's land in order to save a single regiment of 1,600 men. Of the 70 million soldiers who fought in World War I, narrowing in on this small story with these relatively small stakes is so genius, immersive, and true. In a world war of 70 million soldiers, we care only about 2 people saving less than 2,000. And in those smaller numbers, so much more is said. We aren't supposed to care about a platoon of cliché characters just to watch them all die one by one at the end. We care only about 2. Blake doesn't take half a dozen bullets in his death. He dies from 1 stab wound. It's a miracle that Schofield makes it through all of this. But it still feels real. He doesn't have plot armor. Well, except for this scene. I mean, yeah, I know you guys are stormtroopers, but come on! War stories are often how we remember and learn to care about the darkest hours that our ancestors had to go through. And as the generations of those who fought in the world wars continue to die off, is how we are going to picture the bravery, the sacrifice, and the humanity of those numbers and dates we read over in history class. And I think that 1917 adds to the small collection of stories that do it right. A war like the Great War cannot be portrayed in the heroic romanticism that it destroyed, and that we also reserve for other wars. It was a tragic, messy, dark, hellish, and unimaginable turning point for everything. That's why World War I's most beloved novel isn't about a heroic pilot dueling in the sky, or about an officer valiantly leading his men over the top. It isn't about a brave, gallant, shining knight of a hero. It's about a broken, scared German teenager sitting in a trench hoping that he won't be blown up. Side note, I really appreciate that this one German character's name is Boehmer, like Paul Boehmer, the main character of All Quiet on the Western Front, and they look around the same age too. And in the cast list on IMDb, the other German soldier, the drunk one in the scene, was named Mueller, the name of one of Paul's particularly cynical friends. I just love that little Easter egg, if it even was one. I just really like that book. Anyway, this movie tells the right story for World War I, and I think they did an incredible job. Pretty much everyone knows this, but they filmed the whole movie to make it look like it was one continuous shot. We get to travel with Blake and Schofield, and we can feel immersed in the grimy trenches, the barren countryside, and the haunting ruins of a city. Along with that, so many details of this movie truly humanize everything. The faces of Schofield and Blake when they reach the cannons that probably terrorized them for months. This soldier singing a beautiful song before the end. This moment where a German soldier walks towards Schofield thinking that he's a friend, only to suddenly realize an attack. Or this image of a family Schofield sees on one of the German bunks, which takes you a second to dig through all the layers of it. It reminds Schofield of who he's fighting to come home to. But the owner of that picture would have never left it behind, so that could only mean... The climax is such a stunning piece of filmmaking with so much coordination, attention to detail, and effort put in by most likely hundreds of extras and a talented production team. You see dozens of faces as they are about to go over the top, most of them knowing that they will never return. The climax of 1917 takes that element of World War I, where someone might try to project that largely absent romantic heroism, the place where one could charge towards the enemy and become a hero. But all these men understand that this is not the war where that will happen. You see an overwhelmed and despairing captain break down in tears in front of Schofield. You see another officer try to keep Schofield back from going over the top as if he was one of his own. There's so much humanity and character built into that one moment. He's trying to protect him for just a little longer, even though they'll be running into danger soon anyway. You see the soldiers divided into waves, everything is organized, everything is planned. The whole army is not charging at once to save the day like the end of other films. And then you see the man in charge of it all. Colonel Mackenzie, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. He shines in this role as a hollow person responsible for so many dying men, and he just wants to end it all, one way or another. He's foreshadowed by other characters as maybe being insane or war-hungry, but in his small scene, his thoughts are completely understandable. Why should he call off this attack and stand down, when he knows very well that tomorrow he might receive the order to attack at dawn? There were no Nazis in World War I, the Germans were not villains, and I think that's why World War I is often avoided through a storytelling perspective. It's hard to justify how pointless everything felt. It can't be simplified to black and white, good versus evil. The stories here need to be complex, and many people are just lazy and they don't want to put in the effort to find that good story. One last thing. There's this shot in the film's climax, and it's brilliant. In the end, Schofield fails to get there in time, and as he runs along the trench, the music swells and hundreds of soldiers in the first wave charge across the battlefield because the order was not called off. But he still has a chance to save all the others, and he desperately tries to run to get to Colonel Mackenzie, hoping that the mad colonel will not send any more men to their deaths. Schofield bumps into a couple of these soldiers along the way, and this was not planned in the blocking of the scene, but the creative team kept it in. And I'm so happy that they did, because I think it just adds another layer to this moment that they wouldn't have had. The fact that they had to make this all in one take turned into an opportunity to have these mistakes, which I think are some of the most poignant character moments for this film and war movies in general. Each time Schofield falls and runs into another soldier, it crosses and blurs the line between main character and extra in such a way that makes you actually think about all these soldiers charging to their deaths. It truly humanizes these people, usually seen as background characters, as each one of them is a person with their own story. And this is not just Schofield's moment. These sporadic little bumps in the barrier between plot and background are truly genius, even if they were unplanned. I hope we all remember 1917 as a film that beautifully illustrates and humanizes World War I. I hope that watching it will make us think for a moment of Schofield or Blake or Mackenzie, or even Paul Baumer whenever we see those numbers in Wikipedia articles or in our history textbooks. But most importantly, I hope we remember World War I itself, the war to change all wars. It changed everything, not just through its technology and modernization with its planes and machine guns and tanks and zeppelins, but through the fact that it began to change our perspective of war as a horrible nightmare rather than a romantic setting for heroic tales. And I hope that one day we eventually see through the glorious fiction and propaganda and finally decide to fulfill the Great War's true moniker, the war to end all wars. Going